I think we will start the evening's proceedings. I'm Angela Smith. I'm Director of the Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies, and I am delighted to welcome you to the celebration of Trevor Gunn's 2 decades teaching at Georgetown. He has been an integral part of our program for the past 20 years. He has a devoted following of enthusiastic former students, many of whom have gone on to work in the private sector in different countries in Eurasia. He has just been a pillar of our program and a great advocate for area studies and for all of the things that we do. So we're just delighted. I hadn't even focused on the fact that it was 20 whole years until he reminded us of this, so we're just delighted to be able to do that on this beautiful evening tonight. I'm sure all of you know him, but let me just remind you of his, all of his credentials. He's Managing Director of International Relations for Medtronic, which is a Minneapolis-based, the world's largest independent medical technology company. He was formerly longtime Director of the Commerce Department's Business Information Service for the newly independent states, BISNIS, as the acronym is, the clearinghouse for US government information on doing business in the former Soviet Union. He served, of course, as an adjunct professor here at Georgetown for the last 20 years. He received his Ph.D. in international relations from the London School of Economics. He sits on the US State Department's Advisory Committee on International Economic Policy. He's an official trade advisor to the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, USTR, in the Industry Trade Advisory System of the U.S. government. And he is a member of the Board of Directors of the U.S.-Russia Business Council. We're delighted that his wife and daughter are with us tonight, so please join me in welcoming Trevor Gunn.
Sometimes is necessary, requires an incredible family commitment, and my dear wife of now 25 years is with us, and our daughter Ida, along with our 2 sons, one's up in Wisconsin, another one's in Indiana, doing what they need to do. But Angela, thank you very much for the opportunity to stay on. And we've been through thick and thin over the 20 years, and it certainly takes a lot of understanding here at Georgetown, but also my employer, which is an important part of the equation. Right? I started the U.S. Department of Commerce this course. I'll talk a little bit about it in a second. And the second one is obviously Medtronic. And I can tell you in the American private sector, the winds blow very, very hard. And there's not necessarily in all company cultures an understanding that, oh, by the way, I need to, instead of meeting this Minister of Health in this country, actually stay at home and teach a class. Right? And Medtronic is that type of company. And my colleague Jeff Farkas is here, a colleague of mine, Seth Luxembourg, we're all in the same company together. It's an honor to have them with us as well. So I guess I'll switch on to the topic of today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the course first, because there's a lot of unique elements to it, and some of my former students, it's great to see you guys here. Let me talk a little bit about it first. But let's talk about how it came to be. So, this is an organization that doesn't actually exist anymore. Business Information Service for the newly independent states. Where did it come from? It came from something called the Freedom Support Act, which actually put assistance on the street when the Soviet Union broke apart into its various countries. That little organization, I remember when I got a call from the then director, Linda Nemec, who'd just been recruited from another part of the government that we usually don't publicize very much, to start this, because she had very specific regional knowledge, said, I was commuting back and forth to Stanford, working for an organization called IESC, and they said, oh, they're starting up a unit on the former Soviet Union. They've kind of kicked a hole in the wall down at the Department of Commerce. This guy by the name of Pyotr Avin, who today is the head of Alpha Bank, who was at the time Minister for International Economic Affairs for Russia, and Barbara Hackman Franklin, at that time the Secretary of Commerce, decided America needed an education, needed a center where businesses could actually turn to figure out how to spell Kazakhstan and do business in Kazakhstan. That's a comment for you. That was a day when we were actually still using telexes. We were actually still using hard copy cables, which would have made what happened with Edward Snowden impossible from a technical perspective. That was at a time when we had a center of people, we would all pick up on the same telephone, and we called customer service, but the telephones, literally, we would pick up on the same telephone line and 3 people would be talking to the same person at the same time. Technology didn't really exist. And it would take probably about 20 to 25 phone calls to actually get faxed through to your business counterparts in Turkmenistan. So that's the type of environment that we were created in. We had 5 employees we started out. When I ended, we had 38 employees in some what people thought, very crazy parts of the former Soviet Union, like Sakhalin Island. Why would you want to put somebody on Sakhalin Island? People aren't asking those questions today, but they were asking those questions then, and that's very, very important. And then what we did, actually, we put a lot of commercial representatives at BISNIS all around places where actually business was done. Not necessarily where consulates or embassies actually were, but actually where the business was actually being done, where we thought the potential was greatest, like Rostov-on-Don, Tbilisi, Dushanbe, a lot of other, what many Americans would say, crazy places, unpronounceable at the time, where we thought there was business potential. I ended the office, we had 5 clients to start this office. This is very important. 12 years later I left, we had 67,000 clients, if you can imagine, and we had $4.3 billion in deals behind us. So that's the type of experience that kind of inspired me. And my second year in, and this is to my second point, getting the call, Linda called me up one day, and this was about 6 or 7 months into the thing, and says, my old friend Harley Balzer called me up and said, there was a course that somebody tried to do on Russia over at Georgetown, and they wanted somebody else to try it. And I'm like, okay, I got a Ph.D., but they didn't tell me how to teach, so let's give it a shot. So Harley gave me a shot the first time, and Angela sustained that shot since then. And I have a lot to thank them for. The first 3 years, I think, were very difficult. And when you're getting a PhD, you're not taught how to teach in blunt terms, at least not blunt as could be comes, right? And I would say that the first 3 years were extremely, extremely difficult. I looked at some of those evaluations, and Angela seen them, they were like, oh my goodness, how are we going to be able to keep you here, type of things. And then I had a discussion with somebody who's not here anymore, Bill McHenry, who kind of became my advisor. I don't know where even Bill is today, but he kind of took me aside and actually took counsel, actually from a couple students, and the most important advice was just kind of be yourself. However simple that was, all of a sudden the course rankings got where they basically should be. I'm not saying it's 17 years of success, but it certainly was a turning point, and it wasn't easy going in. And it wasn't easy because of the nature of the course. Because as I looked at it, and I looked at businesses, I had helped actually the Swedish Chamber of Commerce, actually, which is about 2,200 businesses, actually starting to form a Soviet. So I had some experience, but it's not easy to, you kind of looking at what it actually takes and looked at the amount of textbooks that were actually available. There was a total disconnect. So I said, oh my goodness, if we're going to do this thing right, we've actually got to make a dynamic course. We've got to do articles. And, Lounge or Library became very, very angry with me. Because I would come in and they're like, oh, that Gunn guy's coming in again with all these articles. And this was before, of course, Blackboard, right? And literally they would like put 2 big trunks of all these articles on the desk, and that was the reserve materials, right? So it was a logistics nightmare in order to actually make it happen, but I think it's been all worth it. Because at the present, it is a unique course, I think, at American universities. In fact, I might have just found sort of almost a counterpart who's actually the head political risk advisor for BP, who just came to town. But that was my first global sighting of my kind of long-lost twin. But there's unique aspects to it, and we can kind of talk about it, because that's very important, I think, for the students and those teachers that may be here as well. One of the unique, I'm just going to the highlights of the present course. Business plans, people come back in the evaluations, which is always very clear to me, are a big highlight of the course. They're a big part of the grade, but equally so, the students kind of reflect back on the things perhaps that were the most valuable to them or got them jobs, those type of things, which are not an invaluable thing to have. This economy business plans are what people turn to. But the issue is that we actually started doing them 18 years ago. And it was about 4 years later, and that was actually not the currency at MBA programs in the United States. I just simply thought, I have clients, there's people that need actually the skill sets that are at Georgetown, and they need to get in the market. They're going to get there a lot more quickly than people that actually understand the region. The languages, the cultures, and those type of things. It's proven to be exactly correct. Because actually I counted up those business plans, I have still hard copies of all of them. And literally 60 of the Fortune 100 companies, we've actually done business plans for. But let me make, and Glenn, maybe you can reflect on, it was very interesting among students, right? Every year you actually have a lot of big company names and all these proposals coming in to all these students. And 2 interesting aspects. Number one is, you guys don't take the big company names anymore. In fact, there were 3 or 4 big company names last year. I'm talking like the largest window manufacturer in the United States. Somebody took a honeybee manufacturer out of Wisconsin. That was a 5-employee or 10-employee company, I can't remember what it was, over that big company name, which is very, very interesting. So just because we did them for the top, let's say 80 of the top Fortune 100 companies, and it comes to my point on small, medium-sized business, they have a real seat at the table. Very, very important. And the useful, practical, the scariest remark that I ever had was when I had a lot of MBA students. Was they would come over to me and they would say to me, "This is the most practical course I've ever had." I said, "But hold on, there's something wrong about that." But it certainly stands out for me and keeps me going from year to year, and I think it keeps people coming into the course. I'm very, very thankful for that. There was one, this was about 5 years in, all of a sudden the enrollment in the course went from about 15 to 35. All of a sudden nobody explained it to me. And so I'm sitting with, can't explain that difference. And it's because of the International Business Phone, it's all of a sudden included as part of the IBD program, which was great. And so that obviously segued into the broader connection with the School of Foreign Service, the things that Ted Miranda is working on and others, very, very important. Another very interesting day in the present was, I bumped into this guy by the name of Bob Dudley, at the time Executive Vice President for BP. This is about 3 years ago. Everyone's going to know the date by this event. And I said, "Bob, who, by the way, used to head up the BP T&K venture. He went into hiding for a very, very long time, and his story really wasn't told. And a lot of academics have tried to deal with that, but he was not very conversant. And I said, "Look, why don't you tell your story into the class?" So you guys kind enough to get coffee and tea, and we welcomed Bob to class. He was Executive Vice President, and 2 months later, a slight little leak happened in the Gulf of Mexico, and Bob became CEO of a company called BP. And that was kind of a highlight for the students to talk to their grandkids about. The great kid from Mississippi that made good. I know everyone's got feelings and emotions about that, so certainly do I, but Bob is definitely one of the finest business leaders that's out there. And was very keen to see the next generation of business leaders be trained in the right things. He certainly saw a lot and was willing to impart that. Lessons from the field. These are generic lessons, not necessarily to the course. Small and medium-sized businesses can and do succeed. In fact, of those 67,000 clients that we actually had, the part that we actually liked the most were the small and medium-sized businesses, because you knew the advice that you were actually giving to them. A lot was riding on that. I mean, sometimes it'd be success or failure. We were just talking about that right beforehand, how one particular venture could actually succeed. 80% of those businesses were actually small and medium-sized businesses of those 67,000. These are companies on both sides, and they could be, Turkmen, they could be Georgian businesses, they could be US businesses, Ukrainian businesses that simply could find each other. And that's the thing, because if you think about the success and failure of business in the former Soviet, people think of big oil and gas companies. Fine and good. I appreciate that this is a natural resource-rich region and they do a lot of exporting, but the issue is the uncelebrated part of that are that small and medium-sized businesses can and do succeed, and often are the core innovators on both sides of the Atlantic. Despite immutable differences, the environment has actually improved in many fundamental ways. Now, some would think that that's a daring comment. I'll sort of disclaim it up front. If the glass is half empty or half full, I'm always talking about the half full. I'm an optimist on the region, there's no question about it. But there certainly, if you look at it from a statistical standpoint, the development of laws, execution of those laws, and a lot of other things are different. You look at some of the surveys, and then you compare it with how the American press is actually treating the region. There is a major disconnect. In my view, there's always been a disconnect. The press, is often your greatest foe because they're always going to pick up on the negative. They're going to pick up on the political, military aspect, and if you ask me, there's not a lot to hope for there. Business is where the potential is. I'm going to be very frank with that, and that's why I continue to do, what I do. Russia often, if I pick one country, feels itself to be special, but the reality is it's not that special. Because if you work like I do in 130 countries in the world, and you're traveling in and out of economies, you're seeing economies that exhibit the exact same difficulties that we would experience in any of the economies of Eurasia. But that somehow Eurasian economies often get the penalty, the perception penalty, which often puts them in a different category. Emerging markets are risky by their nature. Emerging markets, that's why they're difficult. That's why we're not, American companies are not in those regions, and that's the reason why a lot of companies all around the world stay out of a lot of those regions for those same factors. I don't necessarily think that the region is necessarily more risky. If you look at it from a practical standpoint of a particular transaction that you're actually looking at, you're going to have to employ the same risk mitigation issues. You're going to have to look at personnel issues, people that have language skills that can go into the region. You're going to have to look at accounting issues. You're going to have to look at a lot of transactional issues that are going to carry over from country to country. And we like Russia for the things that's special for, the culture, you know, natural resource greatness, you know, et cetera, but certainly not all that special when you actually look at it from a global opportunity perspective. Politics doesn't equal business. Now, and particularly if you're small, medium-sized companies, politics doesn't always equal, I would say always equal is probably a better way to look at it. Now, if you're in the oil and gas area, I certainly get the point. If you're in highly regulated areas, it certainly does to a much higher extent. But particularly you're in areas that are not sensitive in any of the countries of Eurasia, in other areas, I've seen massive success. I'm thinking about this one guy that I met from a place called Sebastopol, California. You would never think about a business like this, and they exist, thousands of them in the United States right now, doing business in Russia. He was doing little mobile telephone stations for the Russian railways. One little box, that's all he did. Sebastopol, California is a place just about 1 hour north of San Francisco. His company was 6 people. They were little, you know, electrical engineers. They assembled these little boxes. They had a little technology. They had a great partnership with Russian railways. How many times did you see articles about that business? He'd probably want to keep it kind of secret, and to a certain extent he did. But, so my point is, politics sometimes plays into it, sometimes it doesn't. I think people think that, oh my goodness, just because Putin and Obama are not getting along today, that my business is going to stop. And I appreciate the fact that it never makes life easy. When I was just down in Brazil the past 2 times, I can tell you what, the Brazilians are pretty opinionated about what has gone on between Brazil and the United States, and there's a Guardian journalist that's making it very obvious, that level of dissatisfaction. And guess what? And Dilma has been pounding very, very hard on the table about things. And guess what? She was practically unelectable in the next election cycle before this started, and now she's totally electable again. So think about that. I appreciate that, but I'm just saying that but business didn't stop all because of that. I certainly think that every American business down in Brazil is worrying about this. In fact, I spent lunch talking to about 40 businesses on Brazil on the phone and off, and I can tell you there was a lot of discussion about this, but no one was saying, we're going to pull out of Brazil. You just have to keep it in the background, get it in perspective. Don't think it, for a moment, determines the whole of your business. But people that are looking into the markets for the first time, certainly, it does color the view, and you have to respect that as well. Long-term mindset. You know, I think the day traders and the shoe traders and the suitcase traders, you know, all those terms that were used for kind of, those people on both sides, that is Eurasian companies and US companies, they're out of the honeymoon period. They were out of the honeymoon period 5 years ago. You really need companies that are in, they know the risks, they're going in, and the long-term mindset is really what's necessary for the region, and that's a big thing to keep in. What are the key factors? If I could stop my life right now and write a book, my book would be about this, which is, of all of the graveyards I've seen of American businesses in the region, some of which were the American company's fault, and not necessarily Eurasian company's fault, or any Eurasian government's fault, okay? I would say, that's the book that I'd like to write, because there are so many lessons that are embedded, but I have to make it really simple and straightforward, like in a presentation like this, but you know, obviously it's a very deep emotional issue for a lot of us that have worked in the region for very long, but I'm trying to make it simple and diplomatic, and that's what I'll do here. High-level company commitment. If you don't have high-level company commitment, there's no possible way, in my personal view, and I don't care if you're the CEO of a 5-employee firm or a 5 50,000 employee firm, you've got to have high-level commitment in order to see things through. It goes hand in hand with the long-term commitment. I really don't believe that you could do it with even senior vice president, only senior vice president to vice president level. I just don't think it works, or it's just going to take so long, it's going to be so painful, you're never going to want to undertake an adventure to being in the world. Patience and staying power goes hand in hand. I certainly think one of the biggest reasons why any of the businesses in any of one of the 12 countries in the CIS and the US companies often fail is because they have a totally different sense of time. The American company arrives, I was just saying this to Ben before, American company arrives with a 1 hour, like the meeting's going to start at 9 exactly, and it's going to end at 10 o'clock exactly, and you know, whatever it is, your counterpart from you name the country is like, we're going to talk about family for the first hour. We haven't even started, right? So when the American company is basically ready to go, we're just kind of getting into the, getting into the substance of it. Huge timing and cultural misconnections, and these are, tremendously important. And guess what? Typical MBAs, I don't think would get this stuff. Yes, global MBAs that have several languages, that have area studies training, maybe lived all around the world as, military brats, diplomatic families, we get the point. But most American executives today, probably of the high level, would not get a lot of these factors. And I could spend a whole day just on cultural dynamics, and that, that's an interesting thing. A truly valuable offering. Now, what does that mean? Now, it sounds great. Everyone needs a truly valuable offering. But I think we think that selling things to the region, be it services particularly, but also products, that somehow, like, we have this naive view that it's just simply going to fly. And it ain't going to simply fly. American companies don't think of financing. They don't think of necessarily in the minds of the consumer, be it a large business, in terms of actually offering financing at the moment of the sale, like most German companies do, or French companies do, or Japanese companies do, or Turkish companies do. We have to think of ourselves against that backdrop. And I think that's very, very important. Certainly we have great products and services. My criticism and suggestion of American business is simply, great, we are most respected in so many interesting and important domains, but it's the way that we get those services and products into the market is where we often fail. And it's not because we don't try, it's not because we're not good-hearted, but we have a tremendous skill set deficit within most American companies that can be filled, I think, by some of the skills that actually are in this room and beyond. But just because it can't be measured, those skill set, and we'll come back to that in a second, doesn't mean that it doesn't have tremendous value for companies. Just because you can't, on the back of a spreadsheet, quickly calculate your numbers, doesn't mean it's not valuable. Any company would be able to tell you that their ventures were slowed down, that there were mistakes made that could have actually been foreseen, that you would be able to do a lot of things better that have actual dollar and cent value, but somebody needs to sit there and actually think it through a little bit more. It's not an automatic process. So I certainly think that knowledge, and I think it goes hand in hand with the fourth comment, which is that you need very, very strong skill sets. And don't think just because we've got MBAs, great American MBAs, that we're simply going to be able to go into the region and rule the world. Now, I don't think many of you guys think that in the room, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But I do think that, today you've probably got, I'm just guessing off the top of my head, you've probably got 1 million MBAs from fantastic schools in the United States sitting back in companies all around Eurasia. So as you think about your own skill set, as you think about who you're going to hire, or whether you're going to send an expatter, you need to be thinking about that context, because you've got we've educated an incredible workforce, an incredible new management cadre that's sitting in all the countries of Eurasia, and you've got to put that into the context of how quickly they've developed their own skill sets. And certainly you have to have strong, very, very strong global team. Strong personal relationships and deep trust. Anybody that's worked in the region knows how important this is. Yes, you'd almost say that's about any region in the world. But there's such a deep sense of mistrust between these different countries sometimes that you almost have to triple your efforts in order to prove your trust, in order to prove and sustain that trust. And it couldn't possibly be more important. When a system doesn't work, what do people rely upon? They rely on their personal relationships. Many of the things that Eurasian companies do, if you look at purely, forget about a lot of background factors, Eurasian companies You take a look at the way that they shuffle profits around, sometimes in legitimate and illegitimate ways, no question about it, but it's completely rational. You know, if you were under the duress of some of these governments and the way that some of the governments can often act, you would probably be doing the same if you were a business owner. I'm not saying that that for a second pardons companies for going much further than their fair share in these ventures, but I certainly think that there's a certain logic, and you take a look at the political structures sometimes that may exist, or particularly individuals that are going into the region, they certainly don't value the opinion of a business, and you can turn it off in a second. Okay. And my final slide. Lessons for educators and students, and this is very important. And my greatest hope is that this will be encouraging for many of the students, particularly about your skill set and how relevant it is. It's really interesting how, before I even touch these points, the first question, and guess what? It's repeated like 5 times in the first class. Is when we talk about business plans, is oh, these are all like, you know, these are important names of these companies. Like we're like language students and culture students and things like that. You know, what can we bring to these companies? And I said, do you think for a second these major companies, small, medium-sized companies, would be coming to you if they didn't realize their own deficit? Do you think they'd be wasting their time, and time is money, if they didn't think that that was valuable? They definitely think it's valuable. And it's always been shocking to me, because I've lived between these two worlds for so long, that question kind of persists. It tells us that there are barriers to be broken down. Let's talk about them a little bit more. No, this is key. Like I said, just because you can't easily measure it, it exists, right? Failures and successes are directly tied to people's knowledge of the region and appreciation, be able to actually carry a conversation about history with a Ukrainian counterpart or any of these things. Be able to carry that, into the evening and to show empathy and understanding of that region. You can't run a business by always relying on an interpreter. It just doesn't happen. I mean, even if the interpreter may be completely fine, do you really want to be dependent for the rest of your life on an interpreter? This is nuts. It's fine, you know, if you're working in multiple countries, but it's not if that's your country. So cultures and these type of things, this is, though they're considered by many, like, and Angela, I think you were making a reference to this, that they're not considered to be hard skill sets. They should be considered hard skill sets. End of story. Combining the technical and business knowledge, this is the thing. If you can combine that with this, knowledge of a particular discipline, IT for example, with business knowledge, being able to do spreadsheets and the financial calculations and all the rest, I mean, I gotta tell you, you can go anywhere in any country, in any industry, in any undertaking, tomorrow, and you've got completely importable. The more of that, these 3 elements that you have, 1, 2, and 3, the better, without saying. Field knowledge is absolutely key, but careful of too much. And what I mean by that is that I see a lot of people go off and do great exchange programs in Spain. I appreciate, I like Spain like the next guy, or Italy, that's fine and good. The real interesting part is actually seeing people actually do exchange programs in a lot of other countries in the world, for sure. And to spend not only time there studying, but actually try to do a specific undertaking, get involved professionally. And there are ways to do that that are legal and appropriate, and that's stuff that you put on your CV. But the issue is, particularly in our region, how many executives do I know that actually spent too much time in the region, and because of the way that the region often is seen, which is kind of an exotic region for many businesses, how many people do not feel welcome home? I know so many executives that come back to the United States and they say, I'm trying to market my skill set on Russia and Eurasia, and I spent the last 15 years over here, and they think I'm, you know, like I just jumped off a planet or something. And although that's ridiculous, because I think if you can lick this region, you can figure out a way to work with this region, you can work with any region in the world. The fact of the matter is that persists. And in a tough employment market, that's the condition that you're living up to. But just be careful of that balance. Remain connected back to places that might be potential for your future. Don't forget the basics, and certainly don't forget your own values. There are tons and tons of business executives that go over there to Eurasia and think, oh, I've got to drink until, you know, my partner drops. That's crazy. Okay? You don't have to give up your soul, you certainly don't have to give up your health, and you certainly are not going to gain the trust of people if you think that you need to give up yourself. You need to, I think if anything that our colleagues over in Eurasia actually understand, whether it be in government, whether in business, is they understand strength. They understand when you know, the fact that you're standing on hard rock and not on sand. And it's tremendously important. Please don't forget that. Business is the only way, and that'll be my next to last point. You know, when I look at political military stuff, and that's no disrespect to anyone that's in the room, you know, I read every paper. Hey, Dan, is there that much to hope for in the political military realm? It's very difficult, right? But when in the case of business, there's a lot more to hope for, because you have people that are they're innovating. They feel like they're contributing to society. You have people making more and more profits, been able to plow back those profits into their families, into their businesses, to overall improve the environment. I think business really brings out the true potential from Eurasia. That's why I continue to do the course. And I certainly think that our students here today, and the educators that might be here as well, might be hearing this, can reflect on, you must see yourself in this picture. You must see yourself in the picture. Just because you have cultural or language, you speak 5 languages, and you're trying to think if this is for you. I'm not saying it's an easy path, but I think it's a worthwhile path. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that kind of inspiring and very full talk that you gave us, and I think you're so right to stress that this really is an area where you can have a positive evaluation of what you can do then, where people have made progress. So I will let you field your own questions here.
Sure.
And
if anyone's got any, or disagreements.
That's right.
Well, you built up a few opinions over the years, so. Please.
So I'm Rosie O'Neill from the Landing program, and of course, I love Trevor. And I just want to say thank you. So this is a public thank you to you for all the work that you've done with our IBD students. I took a tally of how many students have traveled through your course with great success over the years, and I think I counted about 69 or 70, which is a very large number, all very successful, thanks to your great stewardship and teaching. So I just want to say thank you to you.
Thank you very much.
And I'm looking forward to filling your class again next semester.
That's right.
Candidates sitting in this room.
Great marketing opportunity.
Right.
Yeah, thank you very much for listening.
yes, pre-registration for business dynamics in Eurasia will begin soon.
Please.
If I might follow on there, Heather Fernuke actually is CERES alumna and was fortunate to be able to participate in your class several years ago. I'm curious how your perspective and how your teaching has evolved over the years. 20 years is a long time to be teaching the same course, and I wondered if perhaps you could highlight some of your latest shifts in teaching your students.
Yeah, Heather, I don't know if they're latest shifts, but I think an epiphany for me is I'm sorry to be very blunt here. I think when you're 27 years old and you're asked to teach a course, you're pretty young. I was young to start teaching the course. I don't regret it for a second. But I think one of the things that I look back on is, this is a practical course. This is a practical course. If I put it into one word, it's trying to teach students intuition. Can you teach people intuition? I don't know. Can you? I mean, you guys be the judge of. I mean, what I mean by intuition is that I mean that you're increasing your chances of success and increasing your, if you want to call it emotional intelligence, where you see a situation developing, and your intuition to not overreact to that type of situation. So it's very practical stuff, right? I can get into psychometric theory and I can go into, Robert Jervis's perception and misperception and all these type of things, but at the reality, if I don't start almost every sentence by saying how, I'm not doing you guys any service. Because I don't think there were any theories and there were no textbooks, so I think my transition was kind of saying, being honest with myself and saying, although I really respect my colleagues who are academics and more purely academic pursuits, the reality is what I do is completely practical, and I needed to do things and bring, and one thing I didn't, Rosie, to your point, I have a lot of other people to thank, and those are the people that come in and actually have come into the class. Bob Dudley is just the most celebrated, but we have a lot of senior executives that have come in, dedicated their time and said, wow, you guys do these type of things? And I'm like, yeah, they actually learn these type of things in school, and guess what? You're going to help me do it, because I can't do it alone. And that's very, very important, because you don't want to hear me all term, first of all. And number two, you want to hear the full spectrum views on these things, and for you to make up your own decision. I mean, you're supposed to be at the end of the analysis critical thinkers. That's what I think the schools should be teaching you. And if they're not, then I'd scratch my head. But that has been my thing, is kind of being honest with yourself and kind of being honest to your subject matter, and using tools that actually are completely appropriate to that task. Whether people, and I'm thinking back, business schools weren't doing those business plans. I just knew that there were businesses that needed plans. Whether it was academically acceptable was not a point to me, and I credit CERES at the time, RASP, Russian Area Studies Program, before with taking that risk. Please.
First, I would also like to thank you. My name is Helen. I'm a first year in the CERES program. I just spent the last year working in the southern Russian regions of Adygea, Eurasia, and it's come no surprise to me that as far as government-associated programs and exchanges, there's some places where you just can't go. And I was wondering, as far as business in Eurasia, do you see that, are there some regions in any Eurasian regions that you feel that are too politically or too much political or security risk? And if so, which and to what degree?
I think it all comes down to your own personal and your organization's risk tolerance. Right? I mean, if you don't have a family, you're in the risky quadrant. So if you have your family, you're obviously much more risky, and I'd be thinking about your family in those undertakings at a personal level. Then there's the company, and I'm no foreigner to taking appropriate risks, as my dear wife knows. But at the same time, you need to be thinking, sort of at all levels about that question. I think it's very specific to the undertaking as well, because I think it could be a completely Pacific region, with no political turmoil or these type of things. But the specific undertaking that you're doing, actually, let's say in one of the closed cities, could actually excite people in the wrong way. So all of a sudden that increases risk factor tremendously. So I don't necessarily think that there's any region that's necessarily off bounds. I think it really comes down to your own personal decisions, but as well the undertaking that's at hand, and you need to do a case-by-case evaluation of whether you think that that's a good idea and whether you have support for that idea. I mean, just as an example to your question, so as my colleague Jeff Farkas knows, the moment that we make a reservation on American Express, we immediately get an email from I'm trying to remember the name of the political risk firm in London, Crisis, International SOS is the evacuation company, okay? So, and they collaborate with Control Risk Group, which I think are, Kroll, these type, companies that specialize in crazy things like extraction and things like this, right? That you immediately get an email talking about all the risk. And I tell you, if you read this list, you're not going to leave your office. You'll probably never even walk on the street again.
Is this for all countries?
Yeah, all countries, yeah. So you have to think about, companies are thinking about those things, and I would say that has actually increased in our company, particularly in the past 2 or 3 years. So immediately I get in Brazil, and then I get these up. It's not even, it doesn't even, guess what, and they keep coming. Because, let's say I'm going to go to Brazil in 2 weeks. I'll give you an out-of-region example. Go to Brazil in 2 weeks. They start to send you updates on the new riots in Brazil. Those 2 weeks until you get there. Thankfully, they stop once let's just say that if you read those things and you continue to read only newspapers, back to my point on newspapers, you'll probably do nothing. And I think that would be unfortunate. I think that U.S. embassies abroad know a lot more, and if you know people, they're actually working for you. Dan Russell, who used to be the deputy chief of mission at our embassy in Moscow, Dan and I, started working together when he was consul general out in Yekaterinburg. many years ago, providing great information, I think, and through your, that is their job as well, and it is their, through your personal relationships with embassy, you can kind of get a real sense of what those risks are in particular regions. No one knows everything. And yes, we're all going to die. And yes, there's real risk by actually just breathing. But I certainly think that business doesn't stop because of that. You think the Chinese were thinking about that when they were running around Africa? Okay. So please.
Hi, I'm Mirko Hafkas, and you're a major student. Thanks so much for your presentation. The question would be, are you equally optimistic about the region as you were 20 years ago? Especially thinking about what has recently changed in countries like Russia and others, where people, I'm from the Czech Republic, so people looking from that region at
we're thinking 1968.
other Eastern European countries, we feel like they could have gone much further, and I'm just curious about how you see it.
Well, no, I certainly think that some countries could have gone a lot further. Countries like Kazakhstan have advanced probably further than one can even expect. Some countries have advanced kind of as you might expect. Some other countries have not, perhaps, and not easy for me to talk publicly about that. But I certainly would say, if you took a picture today, it's one picture. If you look at the way that youth is changing in Eurasia, that's what gives me huge hope. It's always given me the greatest hope. Because you have people that are, I hate to say Western-minded or Western-trained. That makes it sound like the West is superior and the East is, and that's certainly not the case, right? But they just simply are more globally harmonized. You guys are much more globally harmonized than we'll ever be. We telex typers, and those type of things. And that, all the communications mechanisms, et cetera, that you have, I think it just becomes sort of the new normal is going to be a lot better than the situation that we have right now. And that's what gives me, has it really changed? Yes, it has. Klumba, how many people know klumba? Ooh, that's not good. Okay, well, klumba in Russian means, of course, flower, I think, right? And but actually, it's Club MBA. So it was actually an organization. It was one of the first. It was actually one of the first organizations, and this was founded, I think, in probably 1994. It was the first organization of American graduates, Eurasian citizens graduating from American MBA programs. I got to tell you, the network is fantastic. And you can kind of make a prediction where the region's going to go, exactly at what rate. I don't know. I don't know that anybody knows, and I certainly would be lying to you to say that I can predict that. But I certainly think that the new generations coming up are going to make for a fantastic tomorrow. I have no question about that. The question is, when does the present change? Let's see. Sir.
Greg, I'm a senior in the SFS. You said that a lot of these countries don't really face a lot of really unique business challenges or things like that compared to all the other countries in the world. But what, through your experience, have you witnessed to be the kind of effect of the fact that a lot of these countries are landlocked or either even doubly landlocked in
right.
kind of business?
So geographic, I mean, that's something that's unique, and obviously, Nicaragua building a canal through it, I get the point. You can kind of deal with geography, and it doesn't happen every day that you can deal with, the new Panama Canal going through Nicaragua that's planned. Yes, sometimes you can, tell the gods that they were wrong, but that doesn't happen very often. So that obviously is an immutable, I think, an unchangeable factor. But yet all the other things I think are cultural factors are the variant, in my view. Cultural factors are that is the major variable in the environment. That's exactly what we're talking about, I think, today. And that's where you really need to downshift, need to rethink. And, but the issue is, in the final analysis, we as businesses, you're going to deal with taxation problems. You're going to deal with governments that wake up in the morning and think these crazy ideas. And we're dealing with many of them. I mean, every morning I come in, it's like the new crazy. I mean, I'm talking crazier than crazy every single morning. And variants, but it comes from all places in the world. You got one country that wakes up in the morning thinking it can cut prices of your product 65% without prior consultation. You got one country, and I'm speaking globally now, not just with respect to the reason. You got other countries that simply say, oh, that's right, tomorrow we're going to put in a procurement system where if we can't find any local equivalent of if you can find a local equivalent product, the government actually has to buy it. And if they can't, you can't sell them. And if they can't find the competitive product to a local product, then you can't sell on the market. Those type of it goes on and on and on and on and on, and they get worse and worse, and that's just in our industry. So, you've got those type of harebrained issues. The issue, I think, that one has to think about when it comes to those type of issues, which are, can be seen as crises and how to manage the crisis. And then we were just talking about this, before, Ben, which is the whole issue of, if you've been around for 20 years, you can almost map scientifically what your parameters are. And you can say, I've seen this person, XYZ amount ago. Give you an example. Jan Eliasson. How many people know Jan Eliasson? If you don't, so Ban Ki-moon, I think everybody knows. So he'd be the deputy of Ban Ki-moon, former Swedish ambassador here, and probably the most quintessential global diplomat you'll ever meet in your life. He's dealt with Darfur, he's done some crazy stuff all around the world, a fantastic individual. And, I would say that some of the things that he said actually echo very, very directly. He said, basically the way, success and failure he basically said some of my political ventures comes back to these type of factors. And it's just like, as an example of that, he said, oh yes, the foreign minister of Iran. An important country for the United States right now. Very few people know him, but guess what? I was negotiating with him 25 years ago. I know him very well, I trust him, and he was talking to, relatively close, I won't go any further, relatively small circle of us, other diplomats as well. And I'm thinking at that particular moment, wow, that gives me so much more confidence in actually what our government is actually doing at this particular moment, what direction we actually might be moving in with respect to Iran at that particular moment. It's because of his historical knowledge. It's because of his knowledge of the actors, his personal relationships, with the foreign minister. He knows, the trust factor. All these things that I'm talking about play into this. And guess what? Jan Eliasson, the way he actually, this was 2 days ago, I was in a small group lunch with him, and he says, these are my 4 factors. And guess what? He talked about the success factors for him around the world were right timing, culture, language. Okay, I can't remember the 4th factor, but you get where I'm going here, guys. You should see yourself in the picture. But I mean, there are a lot, coming a little bit further, tax systems, logistics problems, right? All of the other things that you do, just all the other things. The fundamental problem, I think, for all companies is the human resource challenge. The human resource challenge is really probably the most different. And how they adapt, what type of executives you send, how quickly you can adapt to those, that's the fundamental thing, and it comes back to the type of things we've been talking about today. Right? So you're going to be dealing with those factors all around. And geography is unchangeable, but virtually everything else, you can just kind of put all the countries like this, and probably 80-90% of your variables are going to be the same from country to country. You just simply plug in numbers almost. All right.
Questions?
Then I'll thank everybody very much for coming. I guess we have some goodies afterwards.
I get to thank you too. I was going to say, I remember the classic study of the Soviet economy that Joe Berlin published in the 1950s, that the 2 essential things for getting the Soviet economy to work was знакомство и связи. And I think you showed us still business in Eurasia, very important, who you know and the connections that you have, and what better preparation for this students could there be than studying with Professor Gunn. So please think about taking his course next semester. Thank you very much for a wonderful talk, and please, we have a reception, we have food, so stay and continue to celebrate. Thank you very much.